today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about
What's in the way of healthy sex, or regular healthy sex for some of you? Whether you have children or not, it is a fact that one person is going to want sex more than the other. Right? If one person wants it and they're not getting it, it can feel very personal and cause stress. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. I'm your host, Rich Heller, and we're going to talk about common barriers to a healthy sex life. What's getting in the way of intimacy? What's getting in the way of raw sex, much less intimacy? Last episode, we gave a general outline of what this series on sex and barriers to sex is going to be about. Why? Because intimacy and connection are the basis of a happy, healthy marriage. And sex is a key piece for many people in this, though it is true, we may choose not to or age out of it. We're going to talk about some of the common stressors today. We're going to talk about the impact of unresolved conflict. We're going to talk about the emotional disconnect. We're going to talk about practical solutions for overcoming barriers. And then we're going to touch on the next episode in this series. But before we do that, I'm going to ask you, if you have been enjoying this podcast, would you please subscribe? Would you please share it with your friends? Would you please comment? All right. We would love to hear from you. What is it that you're enjoying? What is it you'd like more of? What is it you'd like less of? I mean, just like we encourage you to do in your sex life, we want to know what's working and what isn't. Right? Because communication is so important here. Barriers to sex. Not really in my outline, but really important. And we're going to be interviewing an expert about this, is when there is disparate sexual interest. Disparate meaning unequal levels. One person wants it and the other person don't. All right? And that is really common, particularly after there have been children. But it might be that you haven't had children yet, and one person is less interested than the other. You know, and when people are in the in-love phase, they're giving each other 110% attention. They may be having regular sex, depending on what their belief system is, or they may not. But if they believe in having sex, it's usually pretty intense, usually pretty energized, usually pretty regular. And then they get married and they have children. Life gets real. And the true sex drive of each individual comes out. And one person will typically want it more often than the other. It might be true that it's the man who wants it more than the woman, particularly when there have been children. Might be, not always. I've had many clients once they've had children, they're more focused on child rearing and less interested in sex for a number of reasons. The big one being that child rearing is a higher priority. They don't view sex as high a priority, though they do see it as important. There is a myth that may have truth in our society that men want sex more than women because they have a natural need to spread their seed. And this may or may not be true. I have had couples where the woman wanted sex and the man did not. So it's not always true that it's the man who wants more. But regardless of whether you're in a same-sex marriage or opposite-sex marriage, whether you have children or not, it is a fact that one person is going to want sex more than the other, just like it's a fact that one person's going to want to travel more than another, just like it's a fact that one person's going to like fudge better than another. We all have different aptitudes for different things. And so disparate sex interest can be very divisive. It can feel very personal. Right? If one person wants it and they're not getting it, it can feel very personal and cause stress. Let's go back to children and parenting. You have a child, the child becomes mobile and finds its way into your bed. That's going to interrupt your sex life. We already talked about how many women, when they have children, feel that sex is of lower value or lower importance than paying attention to the children themselves. It may be that both of you become so wrapped up in making more money for these kids and figuring like to support them and figuring out ways to get them to school and get them cared for, and who's going to change the diaper and who's going to feed them and how are we going to keep the house clean, and et cetera, all the things that having children drives, that sex may fall to a lower level of immediate need. And yet one or both of you is feeling sexually frustrated. Work can be a big stressor on sex. How? When people are distracted by work and there's a problem at work, this may get in the way of their desire to have sex. And this kind of all goes back to, by the way, sex as intimacy. If we're not feeling safe, particularly if you're a woman and you're not feeling safe, you're not going to want to have sex. Actually, for men, work-related stress might increase their sex drive, because for men, very often, sex is a way to, post-sex, they feel relaxed and safe. Women need to feel relaxed and safe before they have sex. I'm speaking in very broad generalities here. There are exceptions to every generality. So if you're hearing this and going, that's not me, that's probably because you are an exception to the generality. And generalities are just that. They're not person specific. There can be financial concerns. When there's a financial problem, when there's not enough money, that could actually drive more intense sex, or it might just wipe it out completely, right? And how could it drive more intense sex? Sometimes when we feel our survival is threatened, the need to procreate is increased. It's instinctual. Oh my God, we might die. We need to have more kids so that we can continue the genetic sequence that we have started here. Or it might totally shut us down. We've got kids. I don't want to do this. I need to focus on other things. When these stressors come up, they can lead to conflict. In fact, they will either lead to avoiding conflict or engaging in conflict, depending on your background. Conflict in and of itself is good, right? When there's difference needs to be resolved, and when it's resolved creatively, that's a good thing. But most of us don't know how to do that. Most of us engage in conflict in a negative way. We engage in a way that is, I'm going to win, you're going to lose. We engage in a way that is creates separation in the relationship instead of a coming together. So when there's a difference of opinion, there's an inherent separation right there. The coming together is how to take the differences and make something new and better out of it. But where we tend to go is, I'm right and you're wrong. And that can lead to lingering resentment, particularly if we compromise ourselves for the other person. All right, you want this battle's not that important, I'm going to give in. All right, this battle is not important, I'm going to give in. You do that enough, and eventually you're going to start to resent the other person, especially if they never give in. If you always feel like you're giving in and they don't, you're going to have some lingering resentment. Or you might just start avoiding conflict altogether. When we avoid conflict altogether, that can be a huge interruption to sex. We avoid conflict because we don't want to have that lingering resentment. Or it might be that you're using conflict to have sex, right? Some people get into a big fight, and the only way they resolve the conflict is to have sex afterwards, but they don't actually resolve the conflict. What they do is they use the anger and the passion of that moment and redirect it to avoid the conflict through sex. And what will happen eventually is that they will just fall into an I win, you lose so deeply that sex will stop. There might be an emotional disconnect going on. It might be that you're not feeling safe, that you don't feel that you can trust the other person. It might be that you are afraid to be vulnerable with them. It might be that one of you wants sex for very physical reasons and the other one wants sex for intimacy reasons. And they feel the intimacy reason one feels that the one who wants sex just for the raw experience of it is just trying to fulfill themselves. And the one who's just trying to fulfill themselves might feel the one who wants it for intimacy reasons is avoiding something that's necessary and needed in the relationship. That's going to create a lack of intimacy. It's going to create a greater gap, and it's going to create trust issues. All right. You're going to stop trusting each other. You might not trust each other because of the things that you've been fighting about or not fighting about. You might trust each other because there's been some infidelity, or some, even infidelity could be any breach of trust, by the way. It might be that one of you is spending money while the other one is trying to earn it, and there's some kind of disconnect there. It might be that one of you or both of you are having intimate conversations with other people that really should be reserved to the marriage. It might be that you are more invested in the children that you are the marriage, and that's causing a breach, a sense of distrust. It might be that there is hidden trauma. There is a theory right now that everyone has trauma in their life. There's capital T trauma that we talk about, which is like PTSD, or are you a survival of sexual abuse or incest or rape, or were you in a war zone, or were you bullied perpetually, or were you emotionally abused? That's capital T trauma. But there's also lowercase t trauma, which is any unresolved emotion from any time in our life that might be getting in our way. Unresolved emotion is going to create mental health problems. And mental health problems, basically mental health as we define it today, is any behavior that gets in the way of the functioning of life. We label perpetual interruptions to the functioning of life as mental illness. And that's why we have labels like depression or addiction or bipolar disorder. There may have been times in history where what we're calling a disorder might have been necessary, but right now we view them as being in the way. Because they're in the way of our functioning society, guess what? They get in the way of our functioning in our relationship as well, whatever it is. And left untreated or left unaddressed, the uppercase T or the lowercase t is going to get in the way of intimacy. And if it gets in the way of intimacy, ultimately, it's going to get in the way of your sex life. Let's talk a little more about this intimacy versus physicality. In the last episode, we explored it in depth. Something that might be getting in the way of your sex life might be that you are fulfilling your physical need separate from your partner in a way that doesn't seem like or is defined as infidelity. Maybe you're masturbating. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but if you're masturbating and taking care of the need yourself, then you are escaping from talking about your need. If you're masturbating and just an opportunity to have intimacy, your desire to actually address your need with the other person becomes reduced, right? So I'm not saying there's something wrong with masturbation. I'm saying it's how you use it that might be the problem. It might be that in an intimate marriage, masturbation might not be appropriate unless it's part of your shared sexual experience to masturbate one another or with each other. Maybe that's something you need to talk about. Not talking about these things, not bringing it up, that is going to get in the way. That's going to cause an emotional disconnect. All right. What are the solutions to overcoming these barriers? I already hinted at it. It's number one, effective communication, talking about it, having caring communication, loving, safe, gentle communication. You may need a third party for that. I'm going to tell you that I've worked with so many couples who, when they have this conversation one-to-one, it ended up being a fight because they're so sensitive about it. All right. You might need a couples coach or a therapist or a counselor or someone to talk to about this. To help you talk about it in a healthy way. One of the things that I spend a lot of time here when I'm with clients at Rich in Relationship is giving them tools for responsible expression of emotion and tools for making sure that they're really hearing what the other person is saying, because so many fights are based on one person meaning one thing and the other person hearing something different than what they meant. All right. And so it's really important that there be effective communication, I statements, committed listening, the interview process that I think is pretty unique to what we do here. I don't think I've seen it in any other place. Prioritizing time for the relationship itself is really important. A huge mistake that couples make, particularly once they've had children, is they stop putting their relationship on the front burner altogether and they separate into parallel lives. All right. Not only should you work together as parents, but you should work together as a couple. You should work just as hard on your relationship as you're working on parenting. You should work just as hard in your relationship as you're working on your career. You should work just as hard on your relationship as you're working on yourself and other aspects of your life. You need to prioritize working on the relationship and time to work on the relationship, even if working on the relationship looks like going for a hike together, which doesn't feel like work. Even if working on the relationship means having date night and having some agreements that at date night, you're not going to talk about work or the kids. You're just going to talk about what? Each other. All right. So let's just recap the things that can get in the way. Common stressors like children and parenting. There can be work-related stress. There can be financial concerns. These can get in the way. The impact of unresolved conflicts can get in the way. There might be lingering resentment. There might be avoidance of conflict. There might be an I win, you lose mentality. We talked about a lack of emotional intimacy. We talked about the physicality of sex a little bit and how pleasuring yourself might show up as avoiding the desire for intimacy with your partner. It might show up as avoidance of communication. We talked about trust issues. We talked about mental health concerns, how important it is to address it when you have a lingering pattern, emotional pattern that can be defined as a mental health issue, and you're not talking to a professional about it or treating it in some way, shape, or form. And we talked about solutions. The big one being effective communication. With effective communication, you can rebuild a sense of safety. With effective communication, you can rebuild trust. And with effective communication, safety, and trust, you have the opportunity to be vulnerable. And in that opportunity to be vulnerable, you have intimacy. Prioritizing relationship time is vital to having that communication time. And as always, if you need help, please reach out to me. Go to our website, richinrelationship.com, or there's probably going to be something in the notes for this episode. It is so important that we work on the relationship, that we treat working on the relationship as like the highest priority. Your partnership, your relationship partnership, this is what is going to help you to be successful at work. Your partnership, this is what's going to help you be successful as parents. Your partnership, this is what's going to help you to be successful as an individual. Your relationship partnership is the basis for your success in everything else. And so you want that to be on top. And next episode, we're going to talk more about breaking the communication barrier. Hey, as always, I'm asking you to like, follow, subscribe. As always, I'm asking for your input, comments, questions. Please let me know what you'd like to hear more of. As always, you can reach me at richinrelationship.com or just go to the website, richinrelationship.com. You can find ways to connect to me there. And thank you for listening to another episode of Rich in Relationship.